Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Distance Traveled, a podcast where we signify the lessons learned from the literal and metaphorical journeys of amazing individuals. This is your host, Smith Patel, and today is quite a treat for us. Today we have with us Dr. Robert E. McGehee Jr. Dr. Robert McGehee is one of the most influential educators of medical and graduate students and has been for over 2 decades now. He's a successful researcher, a key administrative leader. He's the dean of UAMS Graduate School since 2004, has held many leadership positions. Other than that, he's also a professor in pediatrics neonatology section, holds additional appointments in Department of Physiology and Biophysics. Whew, man, you got a lot going on. You have also served on the development of freshman medical cell biology course, and that course is now a part of the molecules to cell module. And you have taught this course for 12 years, I understand, and taught 2,000 medical students. So I can literally say you have taught students who are out there in the real world saving lives. That is mind-blowing. So, as I said before we were talking, you don't just get to where you are to becoming the dean doing all this by just, I'm just walking along, gonna make it to the dean. It doesn't work like that. So how do you get to where you are? Let's start from your journey from undergraduate. Where did you?
So I started my undergraduate at University of Central Arkansas, and immediately after that I moved. I was originally raised in Pine Bluff, and I went back down to Pine Bluff and finished my undergraduate degree at the University of Arkansas Pine Bluff.
Okay.
And got a teaching degree, and I got out of undergrad and started teaching high school.
Oh, so you went to Pine Bluff in Central Arkansas for teaching degree. You majored in education?
Yep.
Okay,
Majored in
wonderful.
education. And I got out of undergrad and I started teaching high school here in the Pulaski County School District.
Okay.
Taught for 5 years. Chemistry, physics, biology, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And while I was there, I ran across, if there's a theme to my success, it's amazing mentors. All along the way, I had phenomenal mentors, whether it was at UCA, UAPB. While I was teaching, I was taking some graduate education courses and came across some faculty at the University of Arkansas Little Rock who encouraged me to think about going to graduate school.
Okay.
And pursuing a Ph.D. They introduced me to some people here at UAMS, and I ended up quitting teaching and came back to school full time. And
how hard was that?
Well, it was, it's pretty tough, but there were a couple of things that made it really nice. One was my very first teaching contract was for $9,000.
Okay.
So they didn't pay you much.
that makes it.
It wasn't like I was giving up a huge salary to go back
Right.
into school.
Mm-hmm.
And the other was I was recently married,
Okay.
and my wife had a really good job working with the Dillard's corporate division in advertising. So giving up my teaching job and coming to graduate school on a student stipend, which at that time was $5,400, was really not that much different financially for us than it was with me teaching.
Okay.
I did a lot of supplementation stuff in the summers, but nonetheless, it was, it's like any other young couple starting out. It's hard to start wealthy.
I don't think
I
I've
don't
seen.
think you end up wealthy, but if you don't have much, it's easy to give up something.
For sure.
That was sort of my thought process.
So money definitely not that big of a barrier, but the big thing, and even till this day, people struggle. I've seen non-traditional students because it's been such a long time. 5 years is a long time, doing that kind of stuff. So
Well, I was teaching it.
Okay.
So I was teaching biology and chemistry.
Right.
I was teaching advanced placement biology and advanced placement chemistry. So,
Okay, so
it was a pretty, I was still very actively engaged in the sciences.
All right.
And in fact, the year before I quit teaching, Hillary Clinton was the first lady,
Oh boy.
And she started an initiative to improve education in the state. She was our sort of state education guru for the time, while Bill Clinton was the governor. And I got one of her scholarships to go to some place in the country to work on becoming better advanced placement teachers. And I got one of those and spent a summer down at Austin, Texas at UT. And while I was down there, I met so many people that were doing research, and I thought, well, I think I'd really kind of like to do that. So I came back, I got my ducks in a row, my last year of teaching, and applied for graduate school here, and I started.
When you say here, you mean University of Arkansas for Medical
right
Sciences.
Right here at UAMS.
Okay.
I was very interested in physiology, and I ended up, one of my high school students' father was a physiology professor. And I had known him, so I just came to visit with him, and he encouraged me to apply. I did, and the rest is history, sort of say. But,
Okay. So you started in physiology and biophysics.
that's what my degree was in. Yeah, my
Right.
Ph.D. was from the physiology and biophysics department, where
Right.
you're spending your summer.
Exactly.
Same department.
Exactly. It's a wonderful
A lot of
department.
different people now, but some of the same.
Yeah. So once you got your PhD, what was the plan?
So my original plan when I first came back to graduate school, because I love teaching, but it just didn't pay anything. So I had decided I would go back in to get my PhD and go back into teaching at a predominantly undergraduate institution and be a professor at a more teaching. But along the way, I kind of got bit by the research bug and started doing that and did that. That was my goal, to get a PhD and then get a job at a place like UCA, UAPB, UALR, something like that, and teach at the college level. And but I really fell in love with the research aspects of the training and decided to go do a very formal and pretty rigorous postdoc.
Can you talk a little bit about what you researched in your?
So as a undergraduate, as a graduate student, I was always interested in developmental biology. So we looked at expression for my dissertation work, I looked at expression of a series of catecholamine receptors as they get expressed throughout life in mice. And they're called the adrenergic receptors. And at that time, it was the early days of molecular biology, and my mentor had just come back from University of Washington doing a molecular biology sabbatical. And so we started looking at tissue-specific gene expression of the adrenergic receptors as throughout the lifespan in mice. And that sort of led me to pursuing that as a postdoc.
Okay, so you're going into, because you got bit by this research, but you decided to go to the postdoc route.
Yeah.
Okay, so where do you go there?
So I, at the time, so I was very interested in tissue-specific gene expression, which was really a big deal. Why does one cell express a receptor or a protein, whereas another one doesn't? And how does that happen? So obviously, that a fat cell needs all the proteins to function as a fat cell. A muscle cell needs all the proteins to function as a muscle cell.
Right.
And once it's a muscle cell, you can see what those are. Once it's a fat cell, you can see what those are. But they come from the same progenitors.
Yeah.
So why does that happen? What pushes one way, and why are those fat proteins expressed in fat and not in muscle, and vice versa? So that was a really big deal, a really big question at the time. And so biochemically, we knew what a lot of those proteins were, but we didn't know what the mechanisms were that caused them to be expressed in such a unique pattern. And while I was doing my PhD, there was a group at Harvard that had cloned a protein called CREB. It's the cyclic AMP response element binding protein.
Okay.
And CREB is a transcription factor that is very intimately involved in regulating genes in a tissue-specific manner. And so that had just come out, and they had identified the genetic sequence or the DNA sequences in genes where Krebs binds, and it was pretty fascinating, and obviously had a whole lot to do with developmental biology at a molecular level. And so I contacted my postdoc mentor. His name was Joel Habner, and went up there and interviewed, and he offered me a job. So I was up there for 4 years
Wow, you were at Harvard for 4 years.
as a postdoc. Yeah.
Man, amazing.
So yeah, I was in the Harvard medical system, and his lab was in the Mass General Hospital. So I spent 4 years in Boston. My wife and I spent 4 years up there.
A whole lot different than Arkansas weather, huh?
Yeah, it was a lot different. It was very different.
So
It was fun, though.
how is it since you went from being a graduate student, learning the techniques, learning the fascinating things about research, to doing it, to almost developing the skill of developing a project, or what am I going to do after this? How was that different?
Well, when you're getting your PhD, they teach you learn those methods. Now, a postdoc allows you to refine them, and you learn those methods part of the PhD training is how to ask questions and how to answer them, how to follow the scientific method. And you do that, and that's under pretty close mentorship. But at the same time, you get a little bit more autonomy as a postdoc to do those kinds of things. But still, it's under the direction of somebody who's vested in your project and wants to see you succeed. But at the same time, each step you gain a little bit more autonomy, and while you're taking those steps along the way, you're also building up a lot more self-confidence, and you're also adding to the knowledge that you know about a particular topic, so that really by the time you start a junior faculty job, you have reached a point where you're really able to step off independently and ask questions and write grants to fund the research to answer those questions.
Those are important skills for sure, because it's
Absolutely, yeah.
So what was if you were to go back and look over in hindsight now, what was the biggest skills that you saw or took from your PhD and postdoc at Harvard and at UAMS?
Well, there were probably, I don't know if there was one, but there would be several. Yeah.
Yeah.
One is that if you do it right, you rely heavily on expertise of others to help shape your thoughts and stages as you progress in answering a question. So you learn a lot about team science and getting along with others. And that's true today just as much as it was true when I was a first-year graduate student.
And I love that you pointed that out, because as of undergrad, or even when people don't do research, I'll speak of myself. I'm guilty of that. I thought I'm gonna be a great researcher by doing it all along. Like, I figured it out, but it is not the case. So thank you for pointing that out.
The days of being a great researcher in isolation are almost gone.
Yeah.
I won't say that it's impossible, but it's highly improbable. And that's true. We can talk about that later, but that's there's a number of reasons why that's very true. But the other is that I had mentors that allowed me enough leeway to think outside. Not tell me what to do, but say, how would you do this? And go think about it and put things together and try them. And a lot of failures. So. You got to have mentors that'll let you fail so that you can figure out you only progress through failing. Every experiment doesn't work.
No.
So, those are, you learn a lot from experiments that don't work or failures or routes that you take. So I've had a blessed career.
That's amazing. So as you wrap up your postdoc, what were your plans then? Like, what am I going to do now? Because you have to think of the next step.
So I ended up, while I was a postdoc, I worked on, this was you need to pay the other thing that you learn is you need to pay attention to the issues of the day. And what's important today may not be important tomorrow. And just so it was completely fortuitous, but when I got to Boston, there was a cell line that had just been developed in which you could take fibroblasts and over a period of 5 days differentiate them into adipocytes, which are fat cells, the primary cell in adipose tissue. And it was a pretty cool model. So in 5 days, you could go from entirely one cell type to a completely matured, fully differentiated other cell type in 5 days. So that there's a ton of things happening at the molecular level during those 5 days. And so I began working on that and studying genes which were unique to fat that were not expressed in the first cell type, looking at tissue-specific gene expression and the temporal expression patterns for them. Now, that was why I was doing it, because at the time, there was only one other similar model, and that was for muscle. And some of the early transcription factors for muscle, like MyoD, had just been identified. And a lot of work was being done in muscle, but not anything else because there weren't really any good models for it. So when this cell line was developed, it was really right across the Charles River at MIT where they were developed, and went over and learned how to differentiate those cells and started working on tissue-specific gene expression and the temporal profile of expression. And it just so happened they became adipocytes. So that was in 1989 to 1994. Now, while I was doing that, I was learning a whole lot about fat cell differentiation. And, so what began happening to this country in the early 90s?
Oh, yes.
This little thing called obesity.
And it still goes on till this day, which is sad, but yes.
So obesity was in its infancy of becoming what is now an epidemic. And here I was, for no other reason than I had a good model for it, working on adipogenesis. And of course, that plays a key role in obesity. And so I was coming out of my postdoc at a time when obesity was getting extremely hot with NIH. So I was just lucky.
See, the two things here, so that I want to point out before we move on, because like I even in this just short time, I see a trend here because you went from UAMS to Harvard because you saw something unique. You saw that the postdoc, your advisor there, was doing something cool.
Yeah.
Now from Harvard, you went across the Charles River to MIT because they saw something they were doing.
Well, I didn't go to MIT, but once in the Harvard system, you get all these seminars, everything else. You can go to all these amazing talks throughout the week.
Okay.
And I just jumped on the red line and went over to a talk at MIT when they were talking about this model of cellular differentiation, which I was very interested in. And so that was what we started working on.
Exactly. So you reached out to these people, right? Like after the talk.
Right.
See, so that is the important thing. So like you reached out because like they could have said no, but what if they said yes and you took that chance? So that is important. And then, so luck played a big role when.
Yeah. So I get out of my postdoc and all of a sudden, or I'm wrapping up my postdoc, and obesity is now a very important thing. A lot of drug companies are very interested in developing anti-obesity drugs, and NIH is looking to better understand the mechanisms that lead to to excess adipose. And so I was in the driver's seat. I was offered a number of jobs in industry as well as academia.
Wow.
And it just so happened that I was able to come back here. But my wife did not like the cold weather, so I promised her we'd come south of the Mason-Dixon line.
I'm with you. I'm with her on that one.
So you don't ideally want to ever go back to the place where you did your graduate work. You kind of want to keep going new places. But I was at a point at that time. Arkansas Children's Hospital was really growing their research enterprise, and pediatrics is mostly housed over there. So it wasn't exactly like coming back to UAMS, but it was indirectly. It was really more directly at Children's Hospital, and that was where I started my lab and began doing all that.
So you started work in pediatrics, right? And looking at
And my primary appointment is still in pediatrics.
Oh, okay. So you developed your lab, you started doing research, and then, so now this is where things started taking a little bit of turn, I assume, because how was the journey from pediatrics to the dean of graduate school? How do you
Well,
what's in between there?
well, there's a lot.
Okay,
I mean,
so
you know, so I was an assistant professor. I was doing my thing. I set up a lab. I had grad students and postdocs, and I always loved teaching, right?
yeah,
So I immediately, through physiology, my original department, I got very involved with teaching graduate students, and then I started teaching medical students, and you know, eventually developed a new course for cell biology and began doing that. So I was always highly engaged in education,
right.
and still had my lab and was getting NIH funding and
So how was that like? Because I have been just a part of lab. You ran a lab, and that is highly stressful doing that thing. Yet again, you are taking on such extremely hard projects.
yeah, but it's fun.
So yeah, you must have definitely liked it. How do you
Oh, yeah.
how do you manage that? How did you
Well,
manage that?
you know, I already talked about how you don't do it by yourself. You got lots of help, and really, I had amazing collaborators, and also had great people in the lab.
Okay.
You know, and I was one of the mentors that didn't micromanage. I wasn't in there every day, do these 4 experiments, bring them to me tonight. You know,
Right.
I was, you know, here's our challenge. You know, what are you going to do about it? You know, I gave students a lot of autonomy, and you know, it let them be creative, and I supported them in that. It was a very functioning lab,
That's amazing.
and you know, even though I was a pretty heavy teacher, it's nothing like at a predominantly undergrad. I wasn't teaching, you know, every single day for hours. You know, it's very different. So it was pretty easy to do. But I was in pediatrics. They took the education mission extremely seriously, and I had a chair who supported everything that I did. And she, even though it wasn't that was not necessarily a direct benefit to the department, the clinical department of pediatrics, I had a chair, Debbie Pfizer, who was just absolutely supportive of any education effort. And I mean, so much so, I'm probably the only basic scientist in a clinical department that became dean of a graduate school.
Wow.
Because
You're one of a kind.
most basic scientists in clinical departments only do research.
Right.
They don't want them doing other things. They want them getting grants and generating papers and revenue.
Exactly. So you're setting up a lab and you're doing research. You also started all these things. So what was the next step? So how did you tell us? How did you move through the the ranks? I guess if I were to, because there are so many people today, especially students like me, who look up to you. I personally do. So how would what would you advise them?
Well, you've got to be engaged. So I didn't set out to be the dean of the graduate school.
Right.
I mean, I did set out from my very first day to be highly engaged in graduate education.
Okay.
And I really wasn't thinking too much about medical school, but I eventually got into the very heavy into the medical education as well. So all of a sudden, I'm kind of a go-to person on campus for people that's teaching graduate school as well as medical school. And I've got my lab going, and I'm getting grants and training graduate students, and I'm teaching a lot of graduate courses. I develop new courses. And so I just get more and more involved with graduate education. And it just so happened, we had a graduate dean who left, and at that time they were looking at somebody that could do this on a part-time basis, and it kind of fit in with what I was doing, and I had been, I had a lot of support, and I applied and got the job.
You make it sound so easy, and which is a good thing. If it was hard, you wouldn't be doing it.
Well, it was it turned out to be a good thing. I mean, I didn't set out to be a dean, but I had gotten very, very involved with graduate education. I had done a number of things on committees trying to get interdisciplinary programs going. I felt like I had a really good grasp of what good graduate programs ought to be like. And I think I had a lot of respect from my peers. Not that there weren't other people that could have done it, but I think there were other people that wouldn't have been good at it.
Right,
And I had put a lot of sweat equity into the graduate school here, both as a student and now as a faculty member, and didn't want to see. I wanted to see it keep growing.
Excellent. That's amazing. And then also you said, I reached out. I mean, no, you didn't say you reached out, but you said you got involved in education or teaching the medical students. So how does that happen? Like, do you just reach out?
Well, it has to be intentional.
Okay.
But because I mean, none of the at a comprehensive academic health center, no faculty. There's always exceptions to anything I say, but by and large, no faculty is hired to teach.
Okay.
Teaching is ancillary. They're hired to bring it. They're hired to come in and do research. I'm talking about basic scientists. They're hired to come in and do research and generate grant dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And teaching is important, but it's not why they're hired.
Mm-hmm.
When I was looking, I would not have taken a job if that was the full expectation. I wanted a job where I would have the ability to do a lot of teaching as long as I was doing everything else that I needed to be doing.
Wow.
So it was intentional. And I said literally from day one, I mean, I immediately got here in a clinical department. I got a joint appointment in physiology and biophysics. And you go and you look at the current programs, you see where you might be a fit. I was pretty easy because we didn't have that many molecular biologists. And so, there were a lot of places where I could offer my expertise to teach. And that's what we did. And I mean, so, we modified courses to bring in molecular mechanisms and things like that. And and it's not any different today. We have lots of new faculty come in, and I go talk to all of them, and some don't really have an interest, and others are real gung-ho. And I introduce them to course directors and say, look, here's a new guy that's got all the new methods. Let's get him in front of kids,
I love, first of all, you have great vocabulary. I love gung-ho. That's just wonderful word choice. And I'm glad that you bring that up, that you were intentional about it. And you also said, I was reading this article and I love this quote. That's why I'm bringing it up. You said, because at the end of the day, we are all salesmen. So if we are going to sell something, why not sell education?
Yeah. Well, that's true. I mean, you have to sell everything. You've got to sell a committee that your course is going to be a good one. You have to sell the students that you know what you're talking about, and it's important. If it's not important, you don't need to be there. You need to sell the NIH on, you got to put a grant together and send it to them and sell a committee that you're capable and have the wherewithal to pull off that research. Everything we do is selling just about.
Wow. That is true. The way you definitely, because from not just in science, but in general in life.
And it is true in life, and even applying for jobs.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I mean, there's some salesmanship there. I mean, you have to, and there's fine lines. There's people that are overbearing and it doesn't work, and there's people that are not assertive enough.
Yeah, that's true.
And are their own worst enemies, So I think if going back to your early days of training, if you've done it right and you've had good mentors that allow you the opportunity to interact with people, and because this business has the entire scale of personalities,
For sure.
And to succeed, you may not want to go out and drink a beer with all of them. But at the end of the day, you're probably going to need to be able to sit down and talk to them.
For sure.
And collaborate with them.
Absolutely. Collaboration is key. One thing that you have been on both sides of the sales pitch, selling something and having been sold something, because you've also been on committees and things like that, what would you advise to the people on the other side when they are looking for things, when they're being sold, how to find out if it's good fit or not? Because that would help others to be like, okay, so what am I doing right or wrong?
Well, first you need to really know, you need to have a really good idea of what you want to do. And that's important. So not that can't be, and you may not get there all in one step, but you need to be sure enough about what it is that you want to do so that you can ask the right questions when you're getting sold.
Okay.
All good faculty have multiple opportunities. So what makes them go where they want to go? And so obviously wherever they're going needs to put on a good sales front, but at the same time, and it's true for the salesman too, as well as it is the person looking for the job. You want to sell your place as a place to come to, but you need to do your homework and find out what the person really is looking for.
Right.
Now they may not match, which is okay. I mean, if it doesn't match, you don't want to force it because it ain't going to work anyway. But for the person coming in, if you know what it is that you want to do, like I knew I wanted to be involved in education. So I didn't want a traditional clinical chair that was going to say, I want you in the lab 24/7. I mean, that wasn't going to work. And so I asked, I said, what about opportunities, for me to teach and get involved with graduate education? And, it was like, oh, we would love for you to do that. That's one of our key missions. And, so I asked about, well, if this gets kind of big and can I keep growing it? And it's, oh yeah, absolutely. Things like that, you gotta know. Now, I didn't come in and say, can I be a course director for the freshman cell biology course? And, could I have 5 Ph.D. students in 8 years?
Right.
I mean, you don't ask questions like that, but because you don't ever know where that's going to go. But when the answers are very positive and you've asked the right questions for yourself, then it really helps you.
That's wonderful.
And one of those days, sooner or later, whether it's on a small committee or as a department chair or a dean or whatever, you're going to be doing that selling. And it's a lot of times you got to help the person looking. So, I see faculty recruits, they come in here all the time and they don't know what they want to do. So, and I'll ask them, it's like, what do you think about teaching? And some of them will say, I don't want to say, I'm not sure about teaching. They really may be very interested, but they're afraid if they say, well, I really want to teach, somebody will say, we don't want you. We want somebody that's going to come in and be a revenue generating zombie and just get grants. And, so they're a little bit, so sometimes I'll get people to open up and say, you need to, what kind of stuff do you really want to do? And if it turns out they want something that you can't provide, you just tell them, hey, this isn't going to be a great match, but I know somebody in Alabama or Nebraska that might be right up your alley. But more than often, it's like, I can hook you up with the right people. Here, you're not meeting the right people. If you're interested in, a new pedagogy for medical school, I want to get you in front of somebody over in the College of Medicine who is responsible for that, because they're not going to normally be on the schedule, stuff like that. So,
that is really, really good, because these things you won't find on the online. You don't find it. So this knowledge is what's important. So now, as a dean, what do you still get to be a part of? Like run your own lab, or have you had to?
I did for a long time, and up until about 3 years ago, had a lab.
Okay.
But my best collaborators moved out of state, and it just sort of slowed down. And I have a couple of other jobs too, so it was just too much.
Right.
But so I don't have a lab. I still have NIH funding, and I'm funded by. I've got the CERP grant, as well as the IMSD grant for diversity for predoctoral training. So I'm still highly funded by NIH, just not more in training grants than in pure research grants.
For sure. Okay, so having, because you have done research and teaching all your life, did you like feel like it was not as fun doing, like doing just the administrative role, or
No, because I still stay involved in teaching.
okay, you still say
Yeah.
yes, you still teach?
I teach a lot.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
I teach graduate students and medical students still.
Oh, wow.
We changed and I ran the freshman course as a dean for many years. But we changed our curriculum in medicine to where we no longer have courses. We have these blocks that are interdisciplinary, and I just can't do when those are running. The course director has got to be there all day, every day.
Okay.
And I just can't do that. So, but I still teach heavily in medical school. I go in and give seminars, lectures, and team-based learning events. So
That is the most amazing thing, man. You're truly involved. So this is one of my last questions. We are wrapping up here now. So I see a trend here because you talked about collaboration is key in teaching and in learning. So like sometimes it's just like you are creating a team and a bad person comes in, or like it's just that like no matter how much you screen, that culture that you have developed of collaboration is being broken. And I bet you have had to deal with a lot of that. So how do you deal in a situation like that?
well, fortunately, I hadn't had to deal with a lot of it, but obviously, you get bad players, and I would say I've probably been very blessed because I've never had any horrible players. So I've never had to, get the shepherd hook and snatch somebody out.
Right.
But we have had people that are pretty disruptive. And fortunately for me, they realize it as well as everybody else. And sometimes I've talked with them about it. Other times they've come to talk to me about it and do what I can to try and, find something else.
Okay.
But I've never had anybody that was so egregious, they had to be removed, or that what I would call toxic.
Right.
But we've certainly had some poisonous ones. but it's I don't know that I'm particularly good at it, but I have usually you're not going to change anybody.
Yeah, for sure.
And I would say that the majority of the time when we've had what is not a good match, that's really simple. It's not that the person's bad. It's just not a good match for the group. And it doesn't mean they're bad. It just means they're not a good match for this group. And they need to, so often I will help them find a place where I'll do what I can to help them find a place where it is a good match. I tell students this all the time. I mean, I have students, there are students who, they talk about their mentors and said, well, he's over my back every single day,
Right.
and I have students come in and they'll say, he never tells me anything. You need to swap them because, there are students that love being micromanaged and being told what to do, and they're very good at doing, with that constant oversight and here's the next step. And then there's others. I was one of the others. I mean, that's the last thing I wanted. I don't want somebody over my back telling me what, give me a project, let me run with it or fall off the cliff with it. But, let me try.
Yeah, you wanted to fly.
But, so I've done that with students. I know who mentors are that like to micromanage. I don't mean micromanage in a bad way, that are much more hands-on
Structured.
than others. And, so I'll tell them, go check out this lab, and vice versa.
Definitely. So you've played a lot of matchmaking.
Yeah, a lot.
That's true. And that's a great thing. You have to recognize what's going to fit and what's not going to fit. And that's your job as a leader. So that's also one of the things you have to do.
Yeah.
Right? Well, okay, so it's been 40 minutes. We've learned a
Wow.
lot about your life and the things. So thank you so much for sitting down.
Yeah.
And I want to open the field to anything that you felt like you wanted to say, you didn't say. just advice that you have felt it's crucial for student success?
Wow, you'd think I'd have a ready answer for that. I think students, particularly today, I think a lot of students rely, which is a good thing, but they rely too much almost on social media. And I won't say that you can't, but science is still a personal field. And it's great to email people. And I mean, I emailed Harold Varmus to see if he would come here because I didn't have his phone number. But if you can go talk to somebody, do it. You know, that's how, that's how you really start building relationships. And it's really at the end, you know, when you're down the road, those relationships will be very important.
Right.
And so, you know, don't hide behind, you know, don't conduct your life on social media. You know, get out there and experience real people and introduce yourself to real people like you're doing, you know, coming. And I've been doing this for here 27 years. I've never had a student walk in and want to interview me. But, you know, I mean, those are important things to do.
Exactly.
You got to engage yourself.
And I hope people are listening and follow.
Yeah.
Because, you know, this is, you best believe this person if he's saying that.
Yeah. And the other is, you know, do your homework. You know, when you're getting ready for something, you know, be prepared for it. You know, do the background reading. If you're talking to somebody, you obviously have looked me up on some things. I mean, you know, do your homework and be prepared to talk to them.
Okay.
You know, and then the last thing I think is don't be afraid. You know, get out on that limb, no matter how thin it is. I'll never forget when I was leaving. I was not born in Arkansas, but been here since I was 5 years old. And here I was. We traveled around the country some, but I'd never been anywhere. And we went to Boston. I was pretty nervous. You know, I was like, here I am, a kid from Arkansas, going to Harvard, and I was real nervous. But I was every single bit as much and more often than not more prepared than any of my peers up there.
Oh yeah.
You know, I didn't have to. They were just like me.
Yeah.
And many were not nearly as well prepared as I was. So, you know, you got to have confidence in yourself to take that step.
Right.
You know, a lot of times people don't take that step because they don't have enough confidence in themselves. And I don't mean being cocky.
Yeah.
But you won't know unless you push the envelope, you know?
Yeah.
You just don't know. You got to get out there and try it.
For sure. And I think maybe Arkansas has that in it, the magic in it.
Well, there's a lot of great things in Arkansas. I think it's one of the reasons I never left, and I've had several opportunities. I was kind of loyal to the state, but not just for that reason. We're not big, but the quality is as good as any place.
Oh yeah. For sure.
That's what's important.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I appreciate your time, sir. I truly cannot be more thankful to a person like Dr. Robert E. McGehee Jr., the Dean of UAMS Graduate School. Dr. Robert McGehee is one of the truly phenomenal people. Now, who in this busy world has time to spare to teach us, to teach students, to teach a stranger? And that's just the beauty of the people here at UAMS and everywhere. So go out and learn things, but especially just wanted to thank Dr. Robert McGehee Jr. first for this. Thank you. And to my beautiful audience, I hope everyone enjoyed this talk. We have learned a lot. All the things from failures to sales talk to learning how to collaboration with learning, collaboration with teaching, collaboration with leading. And not just that, we've also learned how to conduct our lives inside and outside the phone, getting out of social media world, and many more things. Please stay tuned for the next speaker and the things we can